He had nothing left in this world, no family, no fortune, not even a second chance at life. All he had was one horse, his only companion, his only hope for survival in the merciless desert. But when he found a dying Apache woman, bleeding and broken in the dust, he made a choice no man could understand. He gave her that horse, knowing it meant giving away his very last chance to live. Alone and helpless, he prepared to die beneath the burning sun. But what happened the next day, when 70 Apache warriors thundered across the desert toward him, was something no one on earth could have imagined. Their act didn't just change his life, it shook the entire world. The wind howled across the desert plains, carrying with it the dry taste of dust and the silence of endless miles. A lone cowboy, Daniel Hayes, rode slowly on his only horse, the creature he had raised since a colt, his closest companion in a world that had never offered him much kindness. Daniel's life had been carved by hardship. He had no family left, no wealth to his name, and the land he called home barely gave enough grass to keep the horse alive. Yet that horse was his lifeline, his only hope of surviving the wild frontier. To lose it would mean to lose everything. The sun was dipping low when Daniel spotted something unusual in the distance. At first, it looked like a bundle of rags lying in the sand. But as he drew closer, his heart pounded against his chest. It wasn't a bundle, it was a woman. Her skin bore the deep bronze hue of the Apache people, but her body was broken, bleeding, her clothes torn and soaked in dust and sweat. An arrow was lodged in her shoulder, and her lips were cracked from thirst. She could barely lift her head when Daniel dismounted. Her eyes flickered open, dark with pain but filled with defiance. She whispered something in Apache tongue, words Daniel didn't understand. But the meaning was clear. She was ready to die. She had fought to survive, but the desert was claiming her. Daniel looked down at her, torn between fear and compassion. He knew the dangers. Helping her could mean death. If her people found him with her, they might not ask questions before ending his life. Yet leaving her here would mean condemning her to the vultures circling above. The cowboy's throat tightened. He poured water from his flask onto her lips, and she drank desperately, her trembling hands clutching the flask until it was empty. Her breathing slowed, but her wounds still bled, staining the sand dark. Daniel glanced at his horse, his only possession, his one chance to keep moving forward. And then he glanced back at her, this stranger, this enemy in the eyes of many, but in this moment, simply a dying woman in need of mercy. It was then he made the choice that would change his life forever. With a heavy heart, Daniel slipped the reins from his hand and guided the horse beside her. He lifted her broken body with all his strength, placing her on the saddle. His horse whinnied as if protesting, but obeyed. Daniel whispered to the animal, "Take her. She needs you more than I do." It was his last hope, his last lifeline, and he gave it away. The Apache woman tried to speak, her lips trembling, but her strength failed her. Daniel steadied her in the saddle and gently patted the horse's neck. "Go," he said, giving the animal a soft slap. The horse began to walk, carrying the woman slowly toward the horizon. Daniel stood there alone, the desert stretching endlessly before him, his body weak, his soul heavy. Without his horse, he had nothing, no water left, no way to outrun the dangers of the land. He had given up his last chance at survival. Night fell cold and merciless. Daniel wrapped himself in his worn coat, lying beneath the stars, unsure if he would see another dawn. His mind replayed the image of the woman's face, the pain in her eyes, the fragile way she clung to life. Had he done the right thing, or had he doomed himself for nothing? He closed his eyes with the weight of that question pressing on his chest. Morning came, blazing and merciless. Daniel rose, his throat dry, his body aching. He staggered across the desert on foot, each step heavier than the last. He had no destination, no horse, no water, nothing but the faint hope that somehow he might stumble upon a stream or a settlement. Yet deep down, he knew his chances were almost gone. By midday, the heat shimmered across the land, blurring the horizon. Daniel's legs buckled, and he collapsed to the ground. His breaths came ragged, his vision dimming. He thought of his horse, of the Apache woman, and wondered if she had survived the night. Perhaps she was already gone, her body lying somewhere in the sand. His sacrifice may have meant nothing. As darkness began to swallow his senses, Daniel heard something: hoofbeats, dozens of them. He forced his eyes open, and his heart froze. Shadows moved across the ridgeline. Warriors, Apache warriors, their faces painted, their horses fierce, their eyes sharp as hawks. There were so many, far more than Daniel could count. 70 at least, maybe more, surrounding him in a thunder of hooves. Daniel's breath caught in his chest. He knew what this meant. They would see him as the enemy, a trespasser, perhaps even the reason for the woman's suffering. Alone, unarmed, weakened by the desert, he had no chance of survival. He braced himself, his hands trembling, waiting for the arrows to fly. The warriors encircled him, their spears glinting in the harsh sun. The ground shook beneath the weight of their horses. Daniel raised his hands slowly, though he knew it would not save him. The leader rode forward, his eyes piercing, his expression unreadable. He spoke in Apache, sharp and commanding. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but he felt the judgment in them. This was the end, but then something happened that Daniel could not have expected. From behind the warriors, a horse pushed through the circle. His horse, and on its back the wounded woman. Her head was lifted now, her eyes no longer weak but blazing with life. She said something in Apache, her voice firm, her hand pointing at Daniel. The warriors listened, their expressions shifting from hostility to something else entirely. Daniel's chest pounded. He didn't know what she was saying, but he knew she was speaking for him. The same woman he had saved with his last hope, the woman he had given his horse to, was now his only chance at survival. The warriors began murmuring among themselves. Their leader dismounted, his boots hitting the earth with a heavy thud. He walked toward Daniel, his face still stern, but his steps deliberate. He stopped in front of the cowboy, his shadow falling over him. Daniel's throat tightened. The next moment would decide his fate. The leader raised his hand, and all 70 warriors went silent. He looked at Daniel with eyes that carried the weight of centuries. And then, slowly, he extended his arm toward him, as if offering something. Daniel could not yet understand. The desert wind fell silent, as if holding its breath. Daniel stared up, bewildered, his heart thundering. Something unthinkable was about to unfold. The desert wind hung still, as though the earth itself waited to witness what would happen next. Daniel knelt on the burning sand, his chest heaving, his body trembling under the weight of 70 eyes fixed upon him. The Apache chief's hand hovered in the air, neither striking nor sparing, and for a heartbeat Daniel thought perhaps the man was deciding whether he lived or died. Then the wounded woman, now upright, steady on Daniel's horse, spoke again. Her voice carried authority, strength born not from position but from survival. She gestured to the cowboy with conviction, her words sharp and unwavering. Though Daniel couldn't understand her language, he felt it in his bones. She was defending him. The chief lowered his hand. Slowly, he turned to his warriors and gave a short command. In an instant, the deadly circle of spears broke apart. Horses shifted back, giving Daniel space. He blinked in disbelief. He was still alive. The chief stepped closer, his shadow falling across Daniel's worn face. He reached down, gripping the cowboy by the arm, and pulled him to his feet with surprising strength. For a tense moment, their eyes locked to men from worlds that history had pitted against each other. But in that silent exchange there was no hatred, there was recognition. The woman spoke again, her tone softer this time, and the warriors listened closely. Daniel's horse nudged against him, as if sensing its master's fear. The chief finally addressed Daniel in broken English. His voice was deep, steady. "You give her horse. You give her life," he said. "Apache, do not forget." Daniel's chest tightened. Relief mixed with confusion. What did this mean? The chief raised his hand again, this time not in threat but in declaration. His warriors shouted as one, a sound that thundered across the desert like rolling storms. Daniel staggered back, his ears ringing. What had he done? What did this outcry mean? Then, something unthinkable unfolded before his weary eyes. One by one, the Apache warriors dismounted. Each man walked forward, weapons in hand. Daniel braced himself, fear twisting his gut, but they didn't raise their spears against him. Instead, they planted them in the sand at his feet. 70 weapons stood in the earth before him, like a wall of steel turned into an offering. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't move, couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. The warriors stood tall and proud, their eyes fixed on him with something that looked far from hate, looked like respect. The chief's voice rang out again. "You gave your last hope to her. Now Apache, give you ours." Daniel's eyes stung. He had given away everything, his only horse, his one chance of survival, without expecting anything in return. And now 70 warriors had laid down their weapons at his feet, not as surrender, but as honor. They were offering him trust, something no outsider had ever been given. The woman slid down from the horse, her body weak but her spirit unbroken. She walked toward Daniel, her steps slow but steady. Standing before him, she lifted her hand and pressed it against his chest, right over his heart. She spoke softly, but her words carried weight. The chief translated, his tone solemn. She says, "Your heart is true. You did not see Apache. You saw only a life worth saving." Daniel swallowed hard, his vision blurring with tears he hadn't expected. He had been ready to die, yet here he stood, honored by the very people he thought would kill him. The warriors gathered around, their voices rising in a chant that echoed across the desert. It was not a chant of war, it was a chant of remembrance, of gratitude. Daniel could feel it reverberating through his bones. He was no longer just a cowboy with nothing left. In this moment, he was part of something larger than himself, something eternal. The chief placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You gave horse, you gave life. Apache never forget." The woman's eyes shone with tears as she looked at him. She had no need to say more. Her survival was proof of his sacrifice, and her people's response was proof that no act of compassion ever vanished into nothingness. For a long time, Daniel stood among them, overwhelmed, unsure what to say, unsure if words could even exist for what had just taken place. The desert, once cruel and empty, now felt alive with meaning. The warriors reclaimed their weapons, but not in hostility. Instead, they lifted them high into the air, a salute that pierced the heavens. Then they mounted their horses again, forming a line around Daniel. The chief signaled, and the line broke open, leaving a space for him. One warrior dismounted and held out his reins, offering Daniel his own horse. Daniel shook his head, stunned. I can't," the chief answered firmly. "You gave, now you receive. This is Apache way." With trembling hands, Daniel accepted the reins. The warrior bowed his head in respect before stepping back into the ranks. Daniel mounted the horse, still trying to steady his breath. Around him, 70 warriors sat tall on their steeds, their presence commanding the land. Then, the chief raised his arm, and the entire band moved as one. They rode not away from Daniel, but with him, surrounding him like guardians. The desert thundered with the sound of 71 horses, moving in unison. Daniel realized then he was not alone anymore. That day, 70 Apache warriors did what no one in the world would have believed possible. They did not kill the cowboy who had trespassed into their land. They did not punish him for finding one of their own. Instead, they gave him honor, protection, and a place among them. His single act of mercy had shattered the wall of fear and hate between two worlds. News of what happened spread far and wide, carried by traders, settlers, and tribes alike. People spoke of the cowboy who had given his last hope to save a dying Apache woman, and of the warriors who answered that sacrifice with something greater. Some called it impossible, others called it legend, but all who heard it were changed. For Daniel Hayes, it was no legend. It was the day he learned that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could echo louder than gunfire, and that compassion had the power to shake the world. He would ride with those warriors for many days after, learning their ways, earning their trust, but nothing could ever erase the memory of that first moment, when 70 weapons fell into the sand, and 70 warriors chose respect over bloodshed. The desert had tested him, stripped him of everything, and left him with nothing but a choice. He had chosen mercy, and in return, he had gained something greater than survival. He had gained a place in history, written not with bullets, but with honor. As the sun dipped low once more, Daniel rode at the center of the warriors, the Apache woman beside him, alive and strong. The horizon stretched before them, endless and full of mystery, and though Daniel knew the road ahead would be hard, he also knew this: his sacrifice had not been in vain. It had become a story that would live forever, a story of a cowboy, a woman, and 70 warriors who did the unthinkable and, in doing so, shook the world. Night fell across the desert, stars glimmering like watchful eyes above. Daniel sat by the fire the warriors had built, its flames painting shadows on their faces. The Apache woman rested nearby, her wound bound, her breathing steady. For the first time since he had found her broken in the sand, she looked at peace. Daniel's thoughts returned to the moment he had given her his horse, his only hope. He had thought at the end of his life. Yet here he was, surrounded not by enemies but by men who had honored him. The chief's words echoed in his heart. Apache, never forget. The crackle of the fire was broken by the woman's voice. She looked at Daniel, her eyes softer now, her lips forming words in English for the first time. You gave life, she whispered. Now you have family. The simple phrase struck him harder than any bullet could. Family. It was something Daniel had lost long ago, something he believed he would never find again. Yet here, among those he had once feared, the word found him. The chief rose, his figure tall against the firelight. He spoke to his warriors, his voice resonant. They listened in silence, then answered with a cry that shook the night sky. Daniel didn't know the language, but he understood. It was a vow, a promise that his sacrifice would not be forgotten, that his name would live among them. At dawn, the warriors prepared to ride. Daniel mounted the horse they had given him, his heart heavy but alive with a new strength. The Apache woman rode beside him, her posture proud despite her healing wound. Together, they moved as part of the 71, the desert trembling under the rhythm of their hooves. Travelers who glimpsed them from afar told stories that spread like wildfire. They spoke of the cowboy who had given everything to save a dying woman, and of the 70 warriors who had answered his sacrifice, not with death, but with honor. Some said the warriors had laid down their weapons before him. Others said they had carried him as one of their own. The truth grew into legend, whispered in saloons, spoken in camps, retold wherever men gathered under starlight. Daniel knew the truth needed no embellishment. He had lived it. He had seen the power of mercy break through centuries of mistrust, and he carried within him the memory of 70 warriors choosing to honor one man's compassion over hatred. As the sun set again, painting the horizon blood red and gold, Daniel realized the desert had given him something far greater than survival. It had given him a place where his sacrifice meant something eternal. He had entered it as a lone cowboy with nothing but a horse. He walked out of it as part of a story that would never die. And in the silence of the fading day, Daniel Hayes understood, sometimes a single act of kindness is strong enough to shake the world forever. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If it touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs hope, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Your support helps us bring these powerful tales to life every day. Until next time, take care and thank you for being part of Legacy Ignited.